We have reached conference championship weekend, and at this time next week, we will have the answer to the question that we have been asking for weeks. Who will be the 4 teams competing in this season's college football playoff? We've got 7 conference championship games to predict for this week in college football. So, as you can see on this background right here, I'm going to go from the left to the right. So I'm going to start off with Oregon and USC in the Pac-12 championship game, then go to the Big Ten championship game, then Big 12, then the AAC, then the SEC, then the Sun Belt, and I'm going to wrap it up with the ACC Championship game between Notre Dame and Clemson. And the last time these two teams played each other, it was ultimately the game of the year. Notre Dame won in double overtime, 47-40, but Clemson did not have Trevor Lawrence that night. And Trevor Lawrence will be playing this time around against the Fighting Irish. So could that game be a different outcome? Without further ado, let's get to the conference championship weekend predictions. Starting off with the Pac-12 championship game between Oregon and USC. That's right, it is Oregon and not Washington competing in this Pac-12 championship game, as it was announced today that Washington informed the Pac-12 that they don't have enough players to play in this Pac-12 title game against USC. So at that point, it goes to second place in that division, and that goes to Oregon. Now, for Oregon to win this game, they have got to stop turning the football over. And Oregon is -7 in the turnover margin, which is 122nd in the FBS. And that is a disappointing statistic to look at, especially with how good Oregon's defense was last year. Oregon had one of the best defenses in the entire country last year. And Andy Avalos, he really made massive improvements to the Ducks defense. And also 88th in rushing defense. And Oregon, they had a hard time containing Jamar Jefferson in that civil war against Oregon State a few weeks ago. And quarterback Tyler Shuck is only completing 63.3% of his passes. And he has thrown quite a bit of interceptions so far this season. He's thrown a handful of them. And they have ultimately cost the Ducks in some games, definitely against Oregon State. And for Oregon to win this game, they have to have their 1-2 punch at the running back position in Travis Dye and C.J. Verdell to move the football against this Trojan defense. Even though it's been Travis Dye getting most of the carries lately for the Oregon Ducks, it's been that way for the entire season. For USC, in their wins this season, out of all of them, 3 of them have been come from behind wins. The first 2 games of the season against Arizona State and Arizona, and last week against UCLA, which they ultimately had to score 20 points in the fourth quarter to win that game to keep their undefeated season alive. And quarterback Keaton Slovis completing 70.3% of his passes, which is first in the Pac-12 and 7th in the FBS. So the way I see this game, I think if Oregon can move the football with their running game in Travis Dye and Verdell, I think the Ducks have a chance to pull off this upset. But I just think that with Oregon's inability to force turnovers this season, I feel like if USC, if they play a clean game of football, it's going to be a long night for the Ducks, especially with Keaton Slovis and his accuracy. I think USC wins this one. I mean, I know I picked against Oregon last year in the Pac-12 title game, but I just think that this is not as good as an Oregon team as it was last year. I mean, they did lose quite a bit of players from that Rose Bowl team, but there is still some talent still left on that Oregon roster, and I felt like Oregon, they were one of the teams that benefited from the shortened season, the conference-only schedule, because if it was a normal season, Oregon would have began the season with North Dakota State and Ohio State in back-to-back weeks. While for USC, what a win in this Pac-12 title game would mean for the program and Clay Helton. As Clay Helton, it was rumored that he was on the hot seat going into the season. And with him, if he were to win this game and finish the season undefeated going into the bowl season, that would really keep Clay Helton, I think, for at least 2 or 3 more seasons. Although it's kind of hard to predict at this point, because there has been a lot of obstacles that teams have faced throughout the season, with limited offseason workouts, late starts of the season, lack of conditioning. And I just think that maybe USC, can they take the next step in 2021, or will this be a one outlier season? Could USC be like in Minnesota? They had a good season last year, but this season, not a good one for the Gophers. But I'm picking the Trojans to win this one. Next is the Big Ten Championship game between Northwestern and Ohio State. Can the Wildcats shock the world and pull off the upset against Ohio State and ultimately dash in their college football playoff hopes? For the Buckeyes, a win in the Big Ten Championship game, does that get them into the college football playoff? Despite only playing 6 games and only winning 6 games, do they still get into that college football playoff? How will the committee view Ohio State if they were to win this game in the Big Ten title game? Because there was talks a couple of weeks ago about Texas A&M possibly jumping Ohio State for that 4th position. There is some bright spots in Northwestern. They've got a really stellar running game of Drake Anderson, Isaiah Bowser. Evan Hull and Cam Porter have gotten some reps this season for the Wildcats. And Northwestern, they are 2nd in the FBS in scoring defense. So that is at least an optimistic stat to hear if you're a fan of Northwestern, or if you need Northwestern to pull off the upset, like I am as a fan of Texas A&M, which that is a nice stat to look at, being 2nd in the FBS in scoring defense. But Northwestern has yet to face an offense like Ohio State. Quarterback Justin Fields leading the nation in completion percentage, completing 78.1% of his passes. And Ohio State is also 7th in the country in rushing offense and 6th in the country in rushing defense. So as much as I want to see Northwestern shock the world, pull off the upset, I just feel like with Northwestern not playing an offense all season that is like Ohio State's, I'm just going to pick the Buckeyes to win, and ultimately the door of Texas A&M's playoff hopes is really getting thinner, and the door is getting closed even more at this point. Next is the Big 12 championship game between Iowa State and Oklahoma. Iowa State beat Oklahoma in their first matchup in this regular season. Although in this matchup, though, Oklahoma, they did have a lead against Iowa State, but then Iowa State came back in the second half. In the 2 games that Iowa State has beaten Oklahoma in the Lincoln Riley era, Oklahoma's gotten off to a lead, but then Iowa State comes back at the end of the game and steals the win. Now, for Iowa State, their only 2 losses this season are to Louisiana, whose only one loss is to undefeated Coastal Carolina, which we'll talk about later, and to Oklahoma State. And that was kind of a game where Iowa State, they made some mistakes in that game where they possibly could have won that. For Oklahoma, ever since their 2-game losing streak, Spencer Rattler has thrown 14 touchdown passes and only 3 interceptions in the Sooners' current 6-game winning streak. And Breece Hall, for Iowa State, is leading the nation in rushing yards. So the way I see this game, if Breece Hall can get through Oklahoma's defense, which Oklahoma, we have seen them improve on defense this season and somewhat in the last season. Oklahoma is 4th in rushing defense. And it is tough to beat the same team in a season twice. And we're going to see quite a bit of rematches in this conference championship weekend. And this is one of them. I want to see Iowa State win because I think Iowa State, I feel like they're deserving to be in a New Year's Six Bowl at least. So the winner of this game, New Year's Six Bowl, spot the New Year's Six on the line in this one. I'm going to pick Oklahoma to win this one. I just think it's going to be hard for Iowa State to beat Oklahoma twice this season. And I think Lincoln Riley, as much as he doesn't make the adjustments in the second half, I think he's going to make the adjustments this time around. Because he learned what happened the first time, and he can make some adjustments. So I'm going to pick the Sooners. Next, we have the AAC Championship game between Tulsa and Cincinnati. Now, both of these defenses, they don't give up very many points. Tulsa's only giving up 19.9 points per game, 21st in the FBS, which is good, but unfortunately, your opponent is only allowing 15 points per game, which is 5th in the FBS. So Cincinnati is a top 5 scoring defense. And Cincinnati's offense has done really well this season, scoring nearly 41 points per game, and Tulsa's offense is only scoring nearly about 28 points per game. So the numbers and analytics, they would lean towards picking Cincinnati. And that's ultimately what I'm going to do. Because whenever there's a team that I personally think this season that could have a chance of beating Cincinnati, they just shut down their offense. We've seen it against Memphis. We've seen that against SMU. We saw how that they can adapt to stopping the triple option against Army. So Cincinnati, they've picked up really solid wins. I feel like the AAC should just become the 6th power conference. And for Tulsa, their only loss this season is to an Oklahoma State team where they gave a run for their money. And Oklahoma State didn't have that game wrapped up until the very end. So I'm going to pick Cincinnati in this one because Tulsa, even though they've only had one loss, there could have been maybe 1 or 2 other losses that Tulsa could have had this season. So I'm going to pick Cincinnati. They've done really well this season. Very deserving of a New Year's Six. I would say that if it were an 8-team playoff, I'd say Cincinnati, they deserve a spot in there, regardless if they win or lose this one. I'm going to pick the Bearcats. Next, we have the SEC Championship game between Alabama and Florida. Florida, they suffered a loss last week to LSU in a game that is going to be known as the shoe game or the cleat game. Florida, they had LSU stopped on 3rd down until Marco Wilson, he threw a shoe, one of the cleats 20 yards down the field, costing his team 15 yards and a first down, which prevented their offense from having a chance to ultimately win the game in regulation. And Cade York hit a 57-yard field goal for the Tigers. Although Kyle Trask did get Florida into field goal range, but Florida, they couldn't make the 51-yard kick. He had the distance, but not the right angle. Just short, and Florida loses their 2nd game of the season. Although Florida's 2 losses this season, as much as some people want to say that Florida's overrated, honestly, not really. I think Florida's just lost 2 close games this season, both of them by 3 points. Although I think Alabama will give them a reality check in this matchup. Although the one thing that could save the Gators in this matchup, Kyle Trask, leading the nation in passing yards, 3,717 of them. Although on the other side, Mac Jones, 3,321 passing yards, which is 4th in the FBS. And Alabama's defense didn't get off to a good start to the season, neither did Florida's defense. However, Alabama's defense has improved the most, because Alabama's defense has improved so much that they're only allowing 16.8 points per game, so around 17 points a game. And I think Florida will feel probably lucky and grateful if they were to score 17 points, because the later on the season tends to go, the better that Alabama becomes as a team. And I would argue that Alabama, they play a lot better on a neutral site than they do in Bryant-Denny Stadium. And also, Alabama has one of the best scoring offenses in college football, if not the best one, averaging about 49 points per game, while Florida's offense, they do average 41 points per game. But I just don't think that Florida's defense is able to make the stops that I think Alabama's defense is able to make on Florida's offense. So I'm going to pick the Crimson Tide to win this game. I'm going to say win it pretty handily. I'll be surprised if Florida keeps this within 17 points. So I think Alabama wins this by a ridiculous score of like probably 45-17. Next, we have the Sun Belt Conference Championship game between Louisiana and Coastal Carolina. Going into this season, I never would have thought that I'd be predicting the Sun Belt Conference Championship game. But here we are, Louisiana and Coastal Carolina. Louisiana's only loss this season is to Coastal Carolina. And Louisiana, they picked up a big win against Iowa State, what I think was the upset of the season. Because Iowa State, many were talking about Iowa State could be a dark horse, not only the Big 12, but in the college football playoff race. And they beat them in their opener. While Coastal Carolina, undefeated season, best season in program history. Although, what is ultimately making me go with Coastal Carolina in this matchup? I know I said it's tough to beat a team twice in the same season, but I think Coastal Carolina's going to do it. C.J. Maribel, the running back for Coastal Carolina, 844 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns, and he also has 220 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns this season. While Louisiana, they are 83rd in rushing defense, allowing an average of 180.9 yards per game, rushing yards per game. While Louisiana, they do have a nice running back duo themselves between Mitchell and Regis. However, the accuracy of quarterback Grayson McCall, only 2 interceptions off 23 touchdown passes, and a little over 2,100 passing yards. His accuracy and his ability to complete short passes down the field, I think, is going to be really beneficial for Coastal Carolina in this game, because that and the running game of C.J. Maribel, I think he's going to be used to keep Louisiana's offense on the sidelines, because Coastal Carolina is 6th in the nation in time of possession. So I think they're going to eat up the clock, keep Louisiana's offense on the sidelines, and exhaust that defense later on the game goes. I'm going to pick Coastal Carolina to win this one. And finally, the game of the year, part 2. Notre Dame and Clemson. The Irish won 47-40 in the first matchup. However, Clemson was without Trevor Lawrence. Although backup quarterback DJ Uiagalelei threw for 439 passing yards in that game. So what a matchup we have. Number 2 versus number 3 going into Conference Championship Week. And ultimately, college football playoff implications are potentially on the line. Because if Clemson loses this game, they could be out. Most likely be out. And if Notre Dame loses, it's going to be hard to say if they're going to get in or not. I think it depends on how the game goes. Because could the committee view Clemson's 2 losses to Notre Dame as a 1-loss team since they lost to the same team? Are they going to view it that way? I would really doubt it. I think that with 2 losses, you're out. But if Notre Dame were to lose to Clemson here, it could depend on the margin of victory. When you look at this matchup, both these teams are in the top 15 in scoring defense. Notre Dame is 12th and Clemson is 15th. For Clemson, other than Trevor Lawrence, make Travis Etienne beat you. And in the first matchup, Travis Etienne only went for 28 rushing yards and 18 carries, but he did score a touchdown in that first meeting. And if Trevor Lawrence is playing this time, I think you definitely don't let the running game beat you. Well, at least force the running game to beat you, but let it be Travis Etienne. Considering Notre Dame's defense is 8th in the country in run defense, giving up just under 100 yards of rushing per game. In the first matchup for Notre Dame in the running game, Kyron Williams, 140 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on 23 carries in that meeting where Notre Dame pulled off the upset in double overtime. And using Kyron Williams, he's going to be a huge difference maker in this matchup. The way Kyron Williams plays will determine if Notre Dame wins or loses this game. Because I think Notre Dame's going to utilize him so much in this game. They're going to probably give him about maybe 30 touches, at least, maybe even 35. Because Notre Dame is 7th in the country in time of possession. So that's going to be huge. Keeping Trevor Lawrence and that Clemson offense on the sidelines. And the longer you can keep them on the sidelines, the better it is for Notre Dame. Shorten the game for Clemson. Don't make all of these crazy plays. Try to move the football at will. Try to assert your running game with Kyron Williams, and Notre Dame's got a good shot to win this game. But I think with Trevor Lawrence playing this time, it's another different game plan needed for Notre Dame than it was the first time, and I think Clemson will win this game. The question is, by how much? Because if Clemson blows out Notre Dame, the Irish could get left out of this college football playoff. But if it's a 7-point game, I think Notre Dame is safe in the college football playoff. But we're going to see. It also depends on how Notre Dame plays in that game. But I'm picking the Clemson Tigers. I think if Travis Etienne gets going for Clemson, I just think this could end up being a rout. But if Notre Dame, if they contain Travis Etienne, I think Notre Dame's got a good shot at least keeping this close. So I think the closer that is, the better odds that Notre Dame has of making this college football playoff. So those are my conference championship weekend predictions. Like, share, and subscribe, and I will talk to you next time.